Come to order, and thank you very much for joining us. This evening, we are going to complete our work and consider amendments to H.R. 1628, the American Health Care Act of 2017. As you know, our colleagues have been working diligently on energizing themselves on thoughts and ideas of how to improve the American Health Care Act. And for this first panel, I'd like to welcome the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. MacArthur, gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Chairman Upton, as well as the gentlelady from Arizona, Miss McSally, who would be able to speak with us about their additions to the health care bill. And I'd love to have them, please, go ahead and feel free to take your place. I know it looks like there's two chairs there, but there's actually a third one somewhere that we'll find. There you go.
Is that helping Nate in the cockpit?
As each of you know, here at the Rules Committee, you have an opportunity to speak forthrightly about your amendment. We have a chance to do the same. And anything you bring in writing, we appreciate you leaving for our awesome stenographer so that it aids her in not only getting this right, but making sure that the record accurately reflects what we did tonight. Before we go any further, and it's good to see my little brother, the great Fred Upton. Fred, thank you for taking time to be here. I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Ranking Member, Mr. McGovern.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, Mr. Chairman, we've been forced to rely on press reports to figure out what the hell's even in this bill that we're about to report out of rules, because you've concocted yet another secretive backroom deal without holding any hearings, not a single one, or taking any input from Democrats. However, what we have learned from those reports and the little time we've had to review this latest amendment is that you've managed to pick up a few votes for your toxic bill by providing an additional $8 billion over 5 years in a futile attempt to soften the devastating impact your legislation would have on the millions of Americans with pre-existing conditions. $8 billion over 5 years may sound like a lot of money, but it will not even come close to mitigating the exploding premiums that millions of Americans with pre-existing conditions will experience after being forced into inadequate high-risk pools due to your bill. Some analysts have already estimated that an additional $200 billion will be needed over a decade, not $8 billion over 5 years. Now, numbers don't lie, and this latest deal will still leave millions of vulnerable Americans priced out of the insurance market. This, of course, will be on top of the 24 million Americans that the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has already estimated would lose their insurance coverage under your bill. Moreover, this agreement still guts essential health benefits, imposes a discriminatory age tax on older Americans, robs the Medicare Trust Fund of $75 billion, and cuts $880 billion from Medicaid to help pay for a $1 trillion tax break for the wealthiest Americans. Now, let me say that again, not 8, not 80, but an $880 billion cut to Medicaid to pay for a $1 trillion tax break for the wealthiest Americans. It is no wonder that groups like the American Medical Association and AARP are still opposed to your bill. This latest backroom deal is nothing more than a Band-Aid on a catastrophic injury. And, Mr. Chairman, I'll just conclude by saying I think it comes as no secret to the chairman here, but on behalf of Democrats, we are disgusted. We are disgusted with this process, which is indefensible, and we are disgusted with this bill that you are bringing before the House tomorrow. And with that, I yield back my time. I'm happy to yield to the gentleman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, earlier we're taking on something I'm fond of saying about kicking the can down the road, but now we're not kicking it down the road, we're just kicking it down the hall to our Senate colleagues. And if you recall, Mr. Chairman, in the cap and trade measure, we had a thin vote coming out of the House, and then we never saw it again. And I'm in the business of predicting here, and I've been pretty accurate so far. I'll predict for you that this will go to the Senate, and certainly in the form that it's in, we won't see it anymore. But, Mr. Chairman, earlier today, a number of patient advocacy groups came together to express their strong opposition to the latest version of the Republican health care repeal bill. stating in a unified voice that, and I quote, "Current law protects patients from being charged more for health insurance based on a pre-existing condition." This bill, including the MacArthur and Upton amendments, would undermine that vital safeguard. The various patches offered by lawmakers, including high-risk pools and financial assistance with premiums, do not in any way offer the same level of protection provided in current law. These organizations, and I'll cite to them and ask unanimous consent without going into all of them at this point in the interest of time, but the organizations that I just cited to are not the only ones that are in opposition to the bill. The American Cancer Society followed up by contributing an additional letter stating that the latest update is particularly egregious because it would further incent states to apply for waivers from current law market rules that protect patients with pre-existing conditions. This was similarly followed up by a separate statement from the American Medical Association that reads in part, "None of the legislative tweaks under consideration changes the serious harm to patients and the healthcare delivery system if AHCA passes." And it states further, "Not only would the AHCA eliminate health insurance coverage for millions of Americans, the legislation would in many cases eliminate the ban against charging those with underlying medical conditions vastly more for their coverage." The American College of Physicians then added to the chorus by declaring that the American Health Care Act will bring great harm to patients, many of whom are treated by our members, notwithstanding the amendment that reportedly will be offered today on funding for high-risk pools. Footnote right there, we had high-risk pools, and I believe that's why we ultimately got what you all call Obamacare. More than 30 states had high-risk pools. And the experience, and I ask all of you to go back and check it out, the experience was that it didn't work, and largely for the reason that there was not enough money. Mr. McGovern has already pointed out, and I reiterate, that you're going to be about $190 billion short with the little $8 billion walkback that you just put into this measure, allowing that there is out there $130 billion that could be utilized, and I'm sure that we will hear that, but you still come up short. Now, on behalf of 200,000 members in rural America, the National Farmers Union expressed its opposition, stating, and I quote them, "The most recent amendment to the AHCA only moves further away from the National Farmer Union's member-driven policy of affirming the right of all Americans to have access to affordable, quality health care." The conundrum, colleagues, that we face, in my judgment at least, is clearly one where all of us want better health care, and most of us believe, as does the National Farmers Union, that the right of all Americans to have access and affordable quality health care is just that, a right. And some in this body do not believe that to be the case, but I certainly do, and I feel that we are a great country and would be greater if we exercised ourselves accordingly. The United Steelworkers also joined in by stating, "The amendments to the bill do not change the fundamental flaws in the legislation enough to make it worthy of your support. Harmful tax cuts are retained, and the bill would not do anything to reduce costs or to prevent Americans from losing health insurance. In fact, this bill would make these problems worse." And then the AARP, of which I'm a member, says the Upton Amendment would do little to reduce the massive premium increases for those with pre-existing conditions. And continues with, "We urge all representatives to vote no on the American Health Care Act in its current form." Mr. Chairman, it's clear to everyone but Donald John Trump and House Republicans that this bill is dangerously irresponsible. I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the joint letter co-signed, and I've never seen this in the years that I'm here. You all won't be able to see it, but I don't know how they got all of these people together to have their logos on the letter that they sent, and I'm sure many of you all received it too. So I ask unanimous consent, without going through every one of their letters and all of its particulars, that the record reflect this joint letter and the individual letters from the American Cancer Society, the Cancer Action Network, the American College of Physicians, the National Farmers Union, the United Steelworkers, and AARP, and the statement from the American Medical Association, all expressing their strong...
Later that in the record.
All of them, thank you, Mr. Chairman, all of them expressing their strong opposition to the Republican health care repeal bill due to the destructive impact it will have on our nation. And I yield back to Mr. McGovern.
Thank you. I yield back to the chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. We're delighted that each of you are here this evening. We would first go to the gentleman from Michigan, former chairman of the Industry and Commerce Committee, the gentleman, Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make my remarks brief as the hour is late. I'm here to present...
Excuse me. The hour is early. This is the
It
Rules
is, okay.
Committee, Mr.
All right.
Upton. I appreciate you trying to designate the hour, but that
All
is
right.
at the chairman's
I
discretion.
did something about daylight savings time a few
Yes,
years
sir.
ago. So anyway, I offer this amendment on behalf of myself, Mr. Billy Long, David Young, Valadeo, Knight, Denton, Kathy McMorris Rogers, and Ms. McSally, sitting on my right. This amendment does a number of things, and I'm just going to do some quick talking points. It strengthens the American Health Care Act by reaffirming our commitment to protect patients with pre-existing conditions, something I've always cared about. The amendment dedicates $8 billion solely to reduce premiums and other out-of-pocket costs for patients in the individual market with pre-existing conditions who face a gap in coverage and who live in a state who has applied and received a waiver to redesign their insurance market. The AHACA, as amended, already includes an additional $130 billion through the Patient and State Stability Fund, which allows states to innovate and issue additional premium assistance to low-income and chronically ill patients. It is important to note that these new resources are on top of the protections in our plan for those with pre-existing conditions, and that the Republican bill already ensures that insurance companies are prohibited from denying coverage based on a pre-existing condition. They're banned from rescinding coverage based on a pre-existing condition, and prevented from raising premiums on individuals with pre-existing conditions who maintain continuous coverage. That's already in the bill. So what this amendment does, it adds, in essence, $8 billion to states that may apply and receive a waiver, with the understanding that they're not going to get a waiver unless they have established a high-risk pool, of which today, well, no state has asked for a waiver, but there's, how many states actually have high-risk pools today? How many? 35. So they've got to have that, and they've got to petition to get a waiver. If that's approved, this will be additional money to make sure, to ensure all they can to make sure that those premiums don't go up. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman McSally. Welcome to the Rules Committee. We're delighted that you're with us. Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions and members of the committee. Due to the arcane Senate procedural rules within the budget reconciliation process, the AHCA does not and cannot apply to members of Congress and their staff. To address this, I've introduced a separate standalone, simple two-page bill that would repeal the exemption for members of Congress and staff if the AHCA becomes law. In America, lawmakers are not above the law. Members of Congress should be treated no differently than Americans that are struggling to afford health care. Representatives should have to abide by the very same options of coverage as their constituents, and anything short of that is simply hypocrisy. We got to live by the rules we create, and this simple bill does that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. MacArthur. We're delighted that you're with us. Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Well, Chairman Sessions, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the committee, thank you for having me here and considering my amendment. I have said since the beginning of these health care negotiations that this issue has to be about people not about politics. And for that reason, I have three main objectives in offering this amendment. First, it ensures that the essential health benefits remain the federal standard. Two, it bolsters protections for pre-existing conditions and prohibits gender discrimination. And three, it gives states some flexibility to design insurance markets suited to their unique needs so that the cost of coverage comes down and more people can afford it. Protecting the vulnerable, bringing costs down. These are two high priorities. It's my strong belief that we must act now to repair our healthcare system and provide Americans with the affordable and quality healthcare they deserve. Premiums are skyrocketing. We've all heard those reports all over the country, in some cases over 100% per year, year after year. Choices are dwindling. 18 months ago, my state, New Jersey, had 6 choices in the individual market. Today, we have 2. A third of counties in this country have 1. And that problem has to get addressed. Today, there are 23 million Americans who can't afford insurance coverage under Obamacare. They pay a penalty, and yet they have no coverage. They get a waiver, but they have no coverage. I'm not here to discuss the American Health Care Act generally, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have about my amendment. I just wanted you to know why I think it's important that we get this right. And thank you again for having me here and considering my amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I'd
yield
like
there.
to
Thank you very much.
correct
gentlemen.
one misstatement that I had. Currently, there are no risk pools that are operating because the Affordable Care Act, in essence, at one point there were as many as 30 or 35 that were operating. Once the Affordable Care Act was enacted, they have disappeared as they've not been able to maintain any strength. So for a state to receive a waiver, they'd have to create this, and of course, it would have to be approved by the Secretary before this money would be able to be applied to it. So wanted to correct that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The record will reflect the gentleman has provided information that would correct an earlier statement that he made in testimony before the Rules Committee this evening. Thank you very much. Chairman Cole?
I just want to welcome all three of our guests and thank all three of you for the contributions that you've made. Particularly want to single out you, Mr. MacArthur. I think your role in this has been pivotal. But I have no questions, but I'm very appreciative of the efforts all three of you have made to improve this legislation. Yield back.
Thanks, sir. Gentleman yields back. Time, gentleman, Mid-Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I won't be long, but I just have a couple of questions. Since Representative McSally has been kind enough to join us tonight, I just have a couple of questions about your bill and the need for it. As you mentioned in your testimony, we found out last week that the MacArthur Amendment mysteriously exempted Congress from the damaging effects of this bill. And I say mysteriously because nobody seems to know who put the provision in. And as the Vox reporter who uncovered the exemption put it, and I quote, "No one will fess up to putting the Congress exemption in the AHCA amendment," end quote. Apparently, Representative MacArthur, your office told her that the Senate budget added it, and the Senate budget said no. In fact, they didn't. So I guess I'm just, curious. My first question is, where precisely did this exemption come from? And who thought that this bill was good enough for American families but not good enough for Congress? Mr. MacArthur, you wrote the amendment. Did you put the provision in, or Ms. McSally, your bill tries to fix it? Do you know anything about how the exemption got in there in the first place?
This budget reconciliation process is not intuitive to really anyone. I mean, this is very arcane. And so as we've been going through this process in the House, trying to comply with Senate rules, it can only apply, any content can only apply if it's referred to specific Senate committees.
So somebody consciously knowing that, someone consciously moved the legislation
So again, my
forward
understanding is, in order to
without-
comply with these arcane Senate rules of budget reconciliation, where if a matter is going to be referred to some other committee other than the ones that are listed in the original budget resolution, then it'll no longer be applicable and the budget reconciliation process doesn't go forward. So all I know is I heard it didn't apply,
Yeah,
and I
just
said,
wondering
let's fix it.
Who put it in?
Yeah, and it's
who put the
specifically,
exemption-
just to be clear,
exemption
it's
in the first
specifically
place?
related to his amendment. It's not related to other provisions in the bill, so.
Yeah, so who put this exemption in the beginning?
Well, first, I don't believe that members of Congress or our staffs should receive any special treatment. And I don't think anybody believes that.
But Ms. McSally's
Well,
bill
as-
is not, it's not an amendment, it's a bill, but it's to fix the fact that, was it a drafting error, or did somebody?
It's not an
intentionally
error,
try to
but the
exempt Congress?
challenge, as Ms. McSally has said, the challenge is getting House policy, drafting House policy to conform with Senate rules. And I had every intention in drafting my amendment that there would be no special exception for Congress. Senate rules required us to accomplish this.
What Senate rules? Did you talk to the Senate parliamentarian? Who did?
I didn't personally, but the requirement is, because exempting us would require it to go to a different committee, that we needed to accomplish this through a standalone bill, which we have. Ms. McSally has introduced it. I'm an original co-sponsor. I hope you'll support the bill. I think it's worthy of support, and none of us should want to exempt Congress.
None of us do, but from where we're sitting, it looks like you guys got your hands caught in the cookie jar and then got exposed and then decided to fix it after a reporter uncovered it.
Well, that's your interpretation. I wouldn't describe it that way. I think we fixed the issue in the only way that the Senate suggested that we could, and that was through a standalone bill that was introduced around the same time.
Yeah, well, let me finally say that, you know, I mean, organizations, I mean, Mr. Hastings went through a list of organizations that I respect, I mean, from the American Medical Association to the American Heart Association, American Lung Association, to Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, March of Dimes, I mean, AARP, I mean, all these organizations have reviewed your latest, you know, so-called improvements, and I was strongly opposed to the underlying legislation as they were before. Nobody buys into this notion that somehow this protects people with pre-existing conditions. They dispute that very, very strongly. And in fact, as I began with my opening, I mean, the numbers aren't there. And I think it's only a matter of time. I think one of the reasons why we're rushing this bill to the floor tomorrow is because next week Congress is out of session. Members go home, and they're going to hear directly from their constituents about how upset they are about the fact that essential health care protections are being taken away from them. And so I don't want to prolong this, but the fact of the matter is I think anybody who's watching this is scratching their head, wondering that how in the world can Congress be dealing with health care issues in a way where we don't have hearings, where fixes are being worked out in a back room, and we're just seeing the language for the first time right now, that their input is being pushed aside. American people don't matter, all so that there could be a vote before we go on recess because the president wants us to. I mean, I think health care is a very personal issue. It's very important, and people want us to get it right. And I don't think anybody here believes that we're getting this right, even those of us with different opinions in the process that we're utilizing here. I got to be honest with you, this process, to put it bluntly, is a goddamn mess. I mean, it really is. And I don't know how anyone can defend it. Fixes upon fixes to fix the fixes to fix the fixes. And it's going to be brought to the floor tomorrow, and we're going to have a debate, and, you know, and that's how we're going to serve our constituents. I mean, I mean, you guys can defend it, and you'll have to defend it, but I think you're going to be surprised how upset the American people are going to be at the way you're handling this. And I hope that Mr. Hastings is right, that the Senate just says, we're not dealing with this the way you sent it over to them. And but this is not the way we should operate. We're a deliberative body. I think the whole process and the way this is being handled is an insult to this institution, and more importantly, it's an insult to the American people. I yield back my time.
Chairman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman, Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to thank our witnesses for being here. I saw your legislation, Ms. McSally, when you introduced it almost a week ago, and I'm grateful to you for that. I sit on the Budget Committee when I'm not on the Rules Committee, and so I have to deal with those arcane reconciliation provisions. In fact, it's the Budget Committee that gives those instructions out. And so I know how frustrating it is to try to do the right thing and get word back. And of course, you and I, we can't even talk to the parliamentarians on the other side of the aisle. They only talk to senators. So you and I are always in a game of telephone as we try to work through those issues and to get word out back that something that would be common sense to any of the four of us as we work through it just can't be done. It can't be done through the reconciliation process, and I take some responsibility for that. Again, it's the Budget Committee's reconciliation instructions that require that of you, but it would have been very easy for folks to have just taken their toys and gone home, and you all said, for Pete's sakes, we're not going to let silly procedural rules get in the way of doing what we know is the right thing to do, and I appreciate you doing it, and I appreciate everybody sitting on the panel co-sponsoring that legislation. Truth be told, I was prepared to vote a month ago on this bill with the work product that came out of the Energy and Commerce Committee, that came out of the Ways and Means Committee, but you all never stopped believing that we could do something better. Never stopped believing that while we had the healthcare code in front of us, that we could make an improvement that would prevent anxiety from taking the grip of one more family, that would prevent one more person from an unintended consequence, that would rescue one more constituent from a bad outcome. I'm grateful to you for that. People often think these kinds of things are my way or the highway, and so much of the press reports it's my way or the highway. Each one of you is a testimony to the fact that if folks refuse to quit, if folks stay at the table, if folks continue working, we're going to end up with a better work product at the end than we had at the beginning, and I thank you for that. I'd like to ask you a question about your language, but they've all been litigated in the media for day and upon day upon day, and so I know it all inside and out, and I thank you for that. So, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chairman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Florida, Judge Hastings.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
at age 80, I guess much of this is in my past, but I'm sort of like a good laboratory for or a template for people. Before I came to Congress, and when I was going through the impeachment process as a judge, I had health complications, and I did not have insurance. I wound up having quintuple heart bypass surgery. Fortunately for me, I got to Congress about the time, in spite of my protests because of my health, got here in time to have the necessary surgery. Since that time, I've had two other surgeries. Most recently, 3 years ago, knee surgery. And contrary, and I agree thoroughly and hope and believe that Ms. McSally's amendment will be made in order, and I support it fully. Contrary to the belief of some believe that Congress people don't pay any insurance. And I do. And under your measure, even though I'll survive whatever happens, I'm getting ready to have to pay more because, and I don't need to denigrate insurance companies, they're businesses. And I've learned the hard way here that businesses or corporations don't have consciences. And so toward that end, I often wonder, do their mamas and uncles and aunts and others get sick? But I gather that it doesn't matter because they have a bottom line. And the reason the risk pools don't work, and that's the question I want to ask you, Mr. Upton, and I might add, like all of you, and certainly in the case of Mr. Upton that I've known for a long time, I have great respect not only for his dedication to not just this cause, but substantial numbers. And I don't believe there's any member of the 435 plus 6 of us that does not want to have a favorable outcome for all people who are in need of insurance. But before you spoke, Mr. Upton, if you recall, among the things that I said was that this bill is $8 billion that now gets for 5 years and I commented, and you did as well, that there's $130 billion that's out there that can be put together. So the question that I have for you, over a 10-year period, just what is your reasonable estimate of how much it would really take in order for risk pools to be able to meet the needs of pre-existing condition persons?
Well, let me say a couple things, and I do appreciate our friendship, and I'm glad that you survived, and I care, like you, about pre-existing illnesses, that they be covered, and that's why we ensured those number of things about insurance companies will be prohibited from denying coverage based on a pre-existing condition. I would like, and we all said that on the record, Dr. Burgess, who's the chairman of the powerful Health Subcommittee, every member on the Republican side, I want to say, and certainly every member on the Democratic side as well, supported the idea that we get a CBO score on this new bill. And sadly, we don't have it before it
That was going to be my
the
next
floor.
question.
I would have, I called for the CBO to release the score, and I'm disappointed that they don't. And at some point, we will have it. But based on what we do know, and our amendment, I should say, is carefully targeted at those states that may seek a waiver. Obviously, there are none today. I don't know what Governor Scott or, the future governor will do.
I'll get to him in a minute.
All right, well, I know I talked to my governor this morning. He's not interested in seeking a waiver. I would guess that most governors, maybe all, I don't know, will not seek a waiver. And in that case, my amendment just covers something if maybe it happens. And one of the reasons why we targeted the money, so it's $8 billion, it's $1 billion the first year, $1 billion the second year, and $2 billion years each, 3, 4, and 5, because chances are if a governor does take this course, you'll have fewer at the beginning than at the end. I asked the question, is $5 billion enough to cover those that might need some help if a governor sought a waiver in that first year? Because remember, after the first year, they have continuous coverage.
That's right.
The answer, not a lot of facts behind, but the answer was $5 billion should probably cover that, in which case a number of us said, well, we want to make sure that it is covered, and that's why it is $8 billion and not 5. Now,
Could you,
if I
When
could
he
just finish
finishes, I'll
this
yield
with
to
one
you.
or two sentences here. So let's say it's not. Let's say it's more than that. I've said that I will fight with a good number of my colleagues who I've spoke to for more. But until we know what that number is, this, we believe, is sufficient to cover those where a state may, in fact, seek a waiver, knowing that they also have to establish a high-risk pool for them to even qualify to even ask the Secretary of HHS to allow that waiver to come. So I feel, but in addition, we have the other provisions as it relates to the insurance companies. Now, you too, since you've exposed your age at age 80, you are under...
I'm happy about that.
Yeah, no, that's good.
It's not exposure. I
That's
hope
good.
I'm around to say 81 real
And I'll
soon.
confess, I got carded just coming into this building today, I would, this does not impact Medicare. I don't remember when you had your operations, but it doesn't impact Medicare at all. And those provisions allowing you to be covered.
I'm not on Medicare. I'm in the exchange.
Well, you
And
ought to
that's
be in
what I wanted to
Medicare,
say.
too.
Yeah, but I don't use Medicare
Right.
and did not use Medicare with my hospitalizations. But what I was saying and wanted Ms. McSally to know is that we didn't exempt ourselves from Obamacare. The members were required
Now,
to follow through.
As
with
I
that.
recall, we actually had that, remember, that bill came from the Senate.
Yeah,
not the House.
and it was, to help Ms.
Yeah.
McSally and Mr.
Yeah.
MacArthur, it was a staffer that put it in the middle of the night over on the Senate side.
Yeah.
But let me ask Mr. McGovern to ask the question
Okay,
he
I'm
wanted to,
sorry.
Ms.
Yeah,
Costello.
I just wanted to follow up, who did you ask? I mean, that's the whole point of a CBO,
I-
is because we want to
well,
get.
we don't have a
nonpartisan-
CBO
Right, so
score.
who did you, who gave you these figures?
8
Who?
billion.
Who? I'm sorry, who?
You said you asked.
No, I know Mr. Hastings had an answer. I didn't hear.
No,
what he said.
you asked for the 5 billion.
I-
Yeah,
I
was that
asked-
enough?
I asked,
And he asked who?
I asked some of the drafters of, so I made this proposal. I'm not a lawyer like you. I asked legislative counsel, I asked a number of staff, very tied into the, what is the estimate? They thought 5 billion would cover.
But are the drafters economists? I mean, are they
they're
experts?
pretty
I mean,
good- they're pretty good
yeah,
health
but this is-
policy people.
Right, I know, but this is important stuff.
Well,
And that's why,
I-
and you even conceded that it was important that the CBO, that you would prefer CBO analysis. I mean, you're saying you're not sure how much money is needed, and I know
Okay,
that
so
earlier
I-
today, the White House press secretary tried to justify this closed, irresponsibly rushed process by saying it would, I quote, be literally impossible to
So-
predict the effects of your bill. Literally impossible.
So
That's
here-
the White House.
Yeah, so here's an answer. ACA, Affordable Care Act, had 5 billion for 4 years for all 50 states. That was in the ACA bill. So,
Yeah, and the money ran,
So-
money
Yeah.
ran out.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Mr. Upton,
So-
we did away with
so-
pre-existing conditions for the entire country. And
No,
therefore,
we-
there is some difference. I want to move on
but
because.
this would be less states, and it's, anyway,
Well, we'll get back to that, but Mr. McGovern is absolutely correct, and here's why we shouldn't be about the business of rushing. We know why you're rushing. You got to go home next week, and that makes sense. And we also know that the person down at the White House doesn't like losing, he says, but he's getting ready to lose a lot. But all things considered, you're entitled to your politics, and I respect that. But when the deal goes down, every last one of us knows that the last measure that was scored by CBO said that 24 million people would lose their health care. That was the first thing out of the box. And then the second measure moved the needle, and now you've gone right. You didn't come to Democrats. You didn't go with everybody in your own caucus, or you being a moderate, or somewhere along the lines, those in the Freedom Caucus felt placated, and so now they're on board. So let's just take the wraps off of all of that and have it clearly understood that we need a CBO score. And I predict for you, I'm in the prediction business up here, I predict for you that the CBO score is going to show that your measure as offered today is going to allow that more people are going to be without insurance. And it doesn't take rocket science to get to that. My friend and I in handling the rule today, my good friend, Mr. Cole, he made the comment, and I certainly respect and understand that. As a matter of fact, like him, I know his governor. He says he trusts his governor. And you just got through saying, Mr. Upton, that you talked with your governor. My governor has been the governor for 7 years, and I've never said a mumbling word to him, and he's never said a mumbling word to me, and I don't trust him. And I don't trust him for a lot of reasons. He came from an organization called Columbia HCA. And that organization paid $1.7 billion in fines, the largest fine ever in the history of this country. And in all, the company committed 10 different types of fraud, including phony Medicare billing, and that ultimately led to the $1.7 billion fine. So in due respect to my good friend Mr. Cole from Oklahoma, I understand how he trusts his governor, but I don't trust mine, and I don't trust my legislature. Just a few years back, we block granted money, and you may remember when we did that up here, and $300 million went to Florida for Medicaid, and it wound up in the general budget. And somewhere along the line, that became a problem for me. So let me ask either of you, are you comfortable with the fact that you do not have a CBO score when this measure is, if it is, voted on tomorrow? Are you comfortable with that?
well, again, I want to say that almost every member on both sides of the aisle, during the 27-hour markup that we had, indicated that we were hopeful to have a CBO score before it came to the floor. I'm sorry, I don't run CBO, I don't know a lot of people over there. I regret that we don't have it. I think that we should, but we don't have it.
Mr. Upton.
But my
How about
bet
just reclaiming my
is,
time for a minute?
my bet is that we'll have it before the bill comes back.
Reclaiming my time, sir. If a person has asthma, how much do you think it would cost for them to have insurance under your measure?
I can get an answer for you. I don't know what the actual.
If a woman is pregnant, how much do you think it would cost under your measure?
We'll be glad to get some numbers.
Let me give you the two figures: 20,000 for pregnancy, 4,000 for asthma, over 100,000 if you have cancer. That $5 billion or $8 billion will get eaten up in a heartbeat. But Mr. Chairman, this process is a disgrace, and we have before us a bill that obviously is going to kick. I talked today about disaster relief, about how important it is when you have 1,000 people or 10,000 people affected, and you're only one person, like somebody somewhere in Alabama or Texas or in Mississippi this past weekend. In Bolton, for example, only a handful of houses were destroyed, but one person was killed. But those persons' houses aren't eligible for FEMA. And I feel very strongly that one, as well as 1 million that are affected, ought to be a part of our responsibility in ameliorating their condition. So whether 24 million people are going to be without insurance that have it now, or whether one person is going to be without it, I think that our values allow that we should be concerned about them all. But I went off up here last week on a good friend of mine, Mr. Walden, who asked me to tone it down, and I was arguing to him that if you're going to take $880 billion away from people and give it to, in many respects, some of the richest people in this country, with no quarrel with being rich. Some of them had good genetic accidents, and I understand that. But at the same time, a lot of them don't need the money. And yet we're going to take money, and that's basically what you all are doing. And another one of the reasons you want to pass this measure is so you can take some tax benefits out of these medical circumstances and use it for tax cuts somewhere else, which in the final analysis, if we use that one-page plan that the man over there on Pennsylvania Avenue gave us, then here again, we're getting ready to give rich people a whole lot more money. But it wasn't enough that you put this particular measure in. This latest version would gut protections for people with pre-existing condition, and that's according to multiple outside experts. And the dollar figure that most experts say for 10 years, Mr. Upton, is $330 billion. That's where Mr. McGovern and I come down on. He said 200 million short, I say 190 million. To top it, a billion. To top it off, because you plan to rush this to the floor before the ink is even dried, we won't have an opportunity to hear from our own nonpartisan experts at the Congressional Budget Office to understand the full impact of this latest version. And so what's the rush? You seem determined to pass this before anyone has an opportunity to know really what's in it. It's almost as if you're concerned that the new CBO score will confirm what we already know is true, that this bill would be devastating to the people of this country, and especially devastating to older, sick, and low-income Americans. Are you afraid that you may lose whatever support you once had if the American people have a chance to see what's in it? It's hard to imagine that your support could dip much lower than 17%. Let me hasten to add that I said to a colleague on the Democratic side that was gleeful that your first measure didn't pass. There's a move afoot out there on the left and the right with people mad with all of us. And therefore, when I talk about your percentages, I'm talking about the Congress, and then that includes me in that. And that's why I think we should be working together. Or are you afraid that some members might have second thoughts about taking health care away from millions of Americans once they're back in their districts and hear from their constituents. And it's kind of odd to me, and I keep hammering the Freedom Caucus, that their mantra is to know what they're voting on and to know how much it costs. And yet, they've caved in regards to this measure. So I guess the proof will be in the pudding. But to say that I'm disappointed would be mild, and to predict for you what I think is going to happen in the Senate, I think they take health security a little more seriously and is a more moderate body than we are. And so you can reasonably expect that when you pass this tomorrow on the slimmest of margins, that you may never see it again, and you will not see it in the form that it's in. So let's just have at it. I've had my fun. I hope you continue to have yours, and some of you ain't gonna be here the next time that we meet after 2018. Tell your body I said so.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've already spoken a lot about this subject. We had a 28-hour markup, Chairman. Beg to differ. But I'll have ample opportunity to talk about this tomorrow on the floor, I expect. I do want to thank our witnesses for being here. I know Rules is an unusual committee. It meets at unusual hours of the day and night, and no clock in the Rules Committee. Anyone can talk as long as they want in the Rules Committee. That's one of our rules. I appreciate you all being here. Mr. Upton, like you, I really believed in the authorizing committee's product that we produced a month ago. I will accept the changes that have come to us. I know they've been made with the best of intentions, and people are trying to improve things. So I also appreciate the fact that you continued to push this and made certain that your wishes were known and acted upon, and I think that's very admirable. Again, we'll have plenty of time to talk about it on the floor tomorrow. I will yield back to the chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis.
You know, healthcare is about people's lives. It's such an intimate thing, and for those of us everybody who's interacted with the healthcare system in some way, we all know that. I think probably all of your offices, certainly mine, have received stories from people really talking about how the Affordable Care Act has made a difference in their lives. I could share hundreds of them. I'm just going to share two. One woman from my district writes, I'm a single mom on Medicaid. 1 year before moving to Boulder, I was diagnosed with cancer, and my husband left. The cancer was, thank goodness, mild and eradicated swiftly. But now as a single mom, that was fine because my girls and I called ourselves Girl Team, and we knew we were strong. We started our journey in Colorado. After moving to Boulder, my cancer returned, and I needed massive surgery again. This time I would need to be out of work for a full 6 weeks. The surgery went well. I recovered pretty quickly and only had one complication. This whole time I was thankful to have Medicaid. Things started looking up. Work was becoming more stable. Now, as I watch all that's going on, I'm sick to my stomach now for the first time in the last few years. My youngest daughter suffers from chronic migraines and is under the care of the Children's Hospital Migraine Clinic. She could lose that care. She also needs an EpiPen. I can't afford that if I lose my health care. I also have to maintain my post-cancer care, which I also couldn't afford. There's no option that exists outside of Medicaid that I can afford. Another constituent writes, if it were not for our state exchange options, I wouldn't be able to afford health insurance. Without the subsidy from the Affordable Care Act, my premium this year would be nearly $1,200 a month, with a maximum out-of-pocket of $6,500. To put that in perspective, I'd need to have a full-time, 40-hour-a-week, year-round job just to pay for health care insurance. I hope that you and others in Washington can prevent the repeal and replace of the Affordable Care Act. Being able to obtain the medical care and medicine that an individual needs is a basic human necessity. So as we look at these and listening to your answers from my colleagues, we don't know if this is enough, we don't know this score. Can can any of you, reassure my constituents and your constituents that are covered under the Medicaid expansion, that are only able to afford health care because of the subsidies in the exchange, can you assure them that under this new plan, they're still going to be able to afford health care?
Well, let me just say this, I don't think any of our amendments here cover Medicaid expansion. One of the things that we did, my state is one of the 31 states, I presume Colorado is too, one of the 31 states that expanded Medicaid, and we thought carefully crafted a transition period for those states and protected those people. You didn't indicate in the letter from the nice woman whether she was part of the expansion or
Yes.
she's between 100 and 138%. So the way that.
And by the way, you know how low those levels are, right? So,
Yeah, I know,
100%, you can't even, in my town, pay rent
I
and feed
know,
yourself.
I know.
Yeah.
So we continue that at 90%. It'll be at 90. It's actually a little higher than that now. It comes down, but it'll be 90% through at least 90% through 2019. And all of those folks that are in that universe of folks that are qualified then are grandfathered and will be on it until, for whatever reason, they're off. We protect all of those people, really could say forever. And if the state chooses to continue up to that income level.
Let me ask a quick question on protecting those people. It's my understanding, and people's circumstances change in life, as you know.
Yep.
So if our single mom who's on the Medicaid expansion, she might do better in a certain year, be able to work an additional hour, her health, comes together, she works 60 hours a week, she gets a raise, she goes above the Medicaid expansion, she loses her health care, maybe she gets it through a job for a period of time. Let's say a year or two later, she loses that job. She's back in that Medicaid expansion range. It's my understanding she wouldn't get it back. It's only the continuous
Correct. Yeah,
grandfathering.
it'd be those that are, you're right. You're right. Now, a state still could include her at, and I don't know what the Colorado match is off I don't know what it is. In Michigan, it's 63. I know in West Virginia, it's 73 cents on the dollar. In Illinois, it's 50. I know West Virginia is at the high mark. I think Florida may be at 50, right? Are you at 50? 60? So, and I know that too, that as this bill, should it pass, move to the Senate, this will be an issue that the Senate probably will be more generous than what the House has done. And we'll see where things go in conference. And be glad, I don't know if I'll be on the conference or not, but be glad to work with the gentleman and others. Again, my state's one of those transition states. I've heard from my hospitals. I want to make that transition period one that really is.
Yeah, and I just do want to be clear that that grandfathering you referred to, people's incomes
right.
change, they fluctuate. And so, in effect, what I fear would happen, knowing that they risk losing that once they're out, is it discourages people to work more, discourages people from getting raises, because there is the same with the reduction of subsidies in the exchanges. People reach that Medicaid cutoff point of income, and they're smart. They know they can't go above that, or they lose their health care, and they might never get it back because they're covered under the grandfather. So in many ways, it prevents our single mom from being fully employed, from rising above near minimum wage levels. And in my district, which is a higher cost of living district, that Medicaid expansion meant so much because that's the income level of a lot of the working families. I just want to highlight one more issue. There's so many we could be highlighting. I wanted to see if any of you were aware of the Medicaid reimbursement in schools and some of the programs that our school districts use with Medicaid money. Are any of you familiar with that?
Again, I don't think any of these amendments deal with that particular issue.
Well, it has to do with the Medicaid expansion and who's eligible for it. So the same general issue. I got to meet with a number of school boards in my district, and every single one brought up Medicaid reimbursement, how schools depend on Medicaid to provide students with special needs their services. And under this bill, the students that are, again, on that Medicaid expansion, whose life circumstances change, would either be without those additional learning tools, or those resources would legally have to be shifted to those students from other students under IDEA. As we all know, our special education funding is already underfunded. Effectively, if schools take another hit by losing Medicaid reimbursements, if they still have to legally meet the needs of those children, they have no alternative but to shift resources away from other kids. So again, that's in that same basket of the Medicaid expansion, which really helps school districts provide needed services, health-related, to many special needs kids. So I hope that we take into account that Medicaid reaches into so many different areas, including our schools, and is such an important funding stream for serving some of our most at-risk kids as we go about this. And again, I think, I wish we could go about this in a more deliberate and thoughtful way. Here we are seeing last-minute amendments, I guess voted on last-minute amendments. Once again, Democrats have not been included, and I'll certainly reiterate that Democrats are happy to help improve the Affordable Care Act. I haven't heard any Democrats ever since it passed say that that was the end-all and we didn't want to change anything. We have a lot of great ideas. We had a lot of great ideas at the time, as did Republicans that didn't make it into the final bill because of the way that that was done. I had a number of amendments that didn't make it in. I'm sure some of the folks before us did as well. We'd love to work on a process to do that. But frankly, my own personal test of whether something is good policy and should be changed in Affordable Care Act is, does it reduce costs? Does it maintain or improve the quality of coverage? And does it expand coverage? And it's not clear that this bill does any of those. We have the prior scoring that shows that increased costs decreases the number of people covered. It's not the charge of the Congressional Budget Office to address quality per se. I have no idea how it would impact quality, but we should hold hearings about how major changes should impact quality because people care about quality. So again, I hope that my friends will reject this effort. I hope begin a bipartisan course, but even if you choose to, which is certainly your prerogative as majority party, exclude Democrats, I hope that you include ideas from Republicans in a bill that expand coverage, reduce costs rather than increase costs, and maintain or improve the quality of care, which should be addressed from an informative perspective in a hearing process and needs additional information before the House should enact any changes to the Affordable Care Act. I yield back to balance of my
Gentleman
time.
yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Georgia. Gentleman does not seek time. Gentleman from Alabama.
Just a couple.
Gentleman's recognized.
Understand that the Palmer-Schweikert Amendment adds $15 billion for a federal invisible risk-sharing program. Mr. Upton, what your amendment does is it adds $8 billion to the Patient and State Stability Fund for state high-risk funds. Am I right?
Correct.
So we got, get it right, $15 billion, now an extra $8 billion, that's an extra $23 billion essentially going to the same thing, right?
Well, again, to qualify for the $8 billion in this amendment, the state has to have an approval for a waiver. They've got to show that they've got a risk pool that's in essence operating, and it will be, those funds will be allocated to those folks who are subject to loss of coverage because of the waiver.
Chairman, there's already a lot of money already in the Patient and State Stability Fund. You're adding $8 billion to it,
Well,
right?
part of it, correct.
How much is in it before you add your $8 billion?
Well, 130.
So we have $130 billion Patient and State Stability Fund. We're going to add $8 billion to that. We got $15 billion we're putting in the Palmer-Schweikert Amendment. So that's almost $150 billion to help people with pre-existing conditions, high-risk conditions. By just about any bystanders, that's a lot of money. Now, I know that there are a lot of expenses here, but it sure sounds to me like between what was done in the original bill, what Mr. Schweikert and Mr. Palmer have added, and what you have now added, we've provided an enormous amount of taxpayer money to help the people in this country who have pre-existing conditions. Am I missing something here?
Yes, you yield?
No, sir. I'm talking to the chairman, Mr. Upton.
Yeah, I hope that those funds will be sufficient to take care of those, particularly with pre-existing illnesses.
Good. Now, Ms. McSally, you have an amendment that makes it clear that the people of the United States Congress and our employees are not going to be treated any differently than the people in the United States of America when it comes to these provisions. Is that right?
Absolutely. We make the laws, we need to abide by the laws. And again, this was simply because my colleague's amendment here, because of a very arcane, bureaucratic, procedural limitation in the Senate, simply would not allow that to be there. So this is a standalone bill that is going to be voted on before any other bill, and as soon as the AHCA is enacted, it will go into force.
Have you heard any member of the House, Democrat or Republican, who's against your bill?
I have not, and I would hope that nobody would vote against this bill.
So if we adopt your bill, it will be clear to everybody in the United States of America that nobody in the United States Congress or our employees will be treated any differently than anybody else in the United States of America.
That's absolutely true.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman yields back his time. Does the gentleman wish to offer a question?
I do, because I do
Gentleman's
think it's
recognized.
important for the record, to make the record clear. In spite of all these wonderful little fixes, we have a report, yeah, that states fact. I'm not, yeah, facts are tough. We have an, excuse me, I have the time. You wouldn't recognize me, so, I've just been recognized. In spite of all these wonderful things you're talking about, we have estimates that say that the bill is underfunded by about $200 billion when it comes to dealing with people with pre-existing conditions. And that is on top of over $880 billion cut in Medicaid on top of all of that. So, arithmetic is a funny thing. But when you look at all you will be cutting in terms of providing people health care and health care protections. And I would also just say, again, to Ms. McSally, I don't have any objections to the amendment, but we're still all trying to wonder why we need this amendment. I mean, who put this special exemption in the Republican amendment to begin with? Why are we having to fix
Just so that,
this thing?
excuse me just a second.
Who put it in?
Excuse
Why
me
was
just a
it put
second.
in?
Excuse me just a
Yeah.
second, sir. That is a rhetorical question. You have asked that
I
of
didn't get an answer. I want to give one more
the
chance.
the gentlewoman attempted to ask that earlier. I'm not trying to cut you off. All I'm trying to suggest is she did give you an
Yeah,
answer.
well, I'm just pointing out for the record that we didn't
Thank
get an
you.
answer. Nobody knows. But make no mistake about it, and I'll ask unanimous consent to insert in the record this, the Center for American Progress report says the estimate finds House Republican health care bill is underfunded by $200 billion.
Without objection, be entered in the record. Thank you very much. The gentleman, does any other member of the committee seek time? I do not see where any other member seeks time for this panel. I want to thank this panel for taking time. If you'll please remember, we have our awesome stenographer here who would very much enjoy having anything you brought in writing that was part of your testimony. We appreciate your help, and thank you very much. I note that we have the gentleman, Mr. Griffith, who has been able to stop by and see us. We have the gentleman, Mr. Carney, who has dropped by to see us as guests, and I appreciate them being here. I'd like to enter into the record without objection statement from the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Young, that will be placed into the record. That will be done. And is there any other member who would seek to be recognized for testimony tonight? Any other member seek testimony? Seeing none, this will now close the hearing portion of H.R. 1628, H.R. 2192, the American Health Care Act of 2017, to amend the Public Health Service Act to eliminate the non-applicable of certain state waiver provisions, members of Congress and congressional staff. And this now closes the hearing portion, and the chairman will now be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule providing for consideration of H.R. 2192 to amend the Public Health Service Act to eliminate the non-application of certain state waiver provisions to members of Congress and congressional staff under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides one motion to recommit. Section 2 of the rule provides for further consideration of H.R. 1628, the American Health Care Act of 2017. Finally, the rule provides that the further amendments printed in the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted.
You've now heard the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Is there amendment or discussion to that? Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, to
Yes,
set
sir.
the stage for the amendment that I have, I would ask unanimous consent to place the agenda of Wednesday, May 3rd at 8:30 p.m. in the record.
Without objection, be entered in the
For
record.
that end, Mr. Chairman, even though I do not agree with every one of the amendments that have been offered, and more Republican than Democrat amendments have been offered, I make a motion that all of the amendments that were presented to us be made in order and granted the necessary waivers in order for it to be discussed, and that each amendment be given 10 minutes by the body.
You've now heard the motion, the amendment from the gentleman from Florida. Is there discussion on that amendment? Seeing none, the vote now be on the amendment from the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
I ask for a
Those
recorded
have it,
vote.
gentlemen, ask for roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney, no. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman? No. Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Not agreed to for amendment or discussion. Gentleman from
Just
Massachusetts.
a brief discussion, and
Yes, sir.
I think that's it on our side. Mr. Chairman, we obviously oppose this rule, the 31st close rule of this Congress. And given the fact that the process, to put it mildly, has been lousy, I mean, no hearings, no Democratic input, the idea that we would bring this to the floor under a closed process, I think, again, does great harm to the integrity of this House. And I would just remind my colleagues that this is the same bill that will kick 24 million Americans off their health insurance and completely undermine current law protections for people with pre-existing conditions. Mr. Upton's amendment doesn't fix those problems. The bill still segregates people with pre-existing conditions, still allows skyrocketing premiums, and even the small amount of funding in this amendment is not required to be used for people with pre-existing conditions or premium increases. Americans will still be left with less care, higher costs, and fewer protections. I just say to my colleagues, look, if you truly want to protect people with pre-existing conditions, don't change the law. Don't change the law. There's no need. Those people are already protected under the law. Your bill changes the law and allows insurers to charge sick people higher premiums, to price them right out of the market, and you're either for protecting people with pre-existing conditions or you're not. And this bill shows that you are not. Every major healthcare organization, every major patient advocacy organization agrees with us that this bill is a disaster. And so again, the process stinks, the bill stinks. This is a bad deal for the American people, and we strongly are opposed to the rule and to the underlying bill. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it. The
We ask
ayes
for a
have
roll
it.
call,
Gentlemen,
Mr.
ask for roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne? Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Buck? Mr. Buck, aye. Ms. Cheney? Ms. Cheney, aye. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? No. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to, and the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, will be handling this for Republicans.
And I will be handling for the.
Mr. Post will be handling this for Democrats. Is there further discussion? The committee has now finished its work for the day. Thank you very much.